welcome into DawgNation at Large. I'm Cody Chaffins in for Kaylee Mansell this week, joined as always by Connor Riley. Connor, we're back together again. Oh, so soon it seems.
Yeah, it seems like Kaylee was just on vacation a few weeks ago, and now she's out once again. But thrilled to have the best co-host, Cody Chafin, stepping in this week.
She's got her best friend's wedding, so we'll say a little prayer for you. Anybody reference to the 90s movie there? No. Okay. So we thought today for sure, planning this out, when I knew Kaylee wasn't going to be here, we'll have a segment where we'll talk about Georgia baseball. The Diamond Dogs got eliminated in the NCAA regional. Really surprising. They lost to Duke. So it kind of prompted this question for me, Connor. With Georgia baseball, it seemed like it was going to be a year for Omaha. You ranked number 1 during the season. Could you compete for a national title? So what Georgia team, non-football of course, would you like to see win the next national title?
I think my answer is baseball, and I actually think the team coming up short this year adds to the desire to see that. I don't want to see a quick turnaround or something like that. I want to see the progress, the years it takes coming up short. I'm a Boston Celtics fan, and the Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown iteration of the team had gotten so close for so long that I feel like when they finally won the title, it made it all better. Last year, getting to super regionals under Wes Johnson, this year coming up short of that, losing in regionals. When they do break through, get to a College World Series, possibly even win it, I think that's going to make it all the sweeter. Much like you kind of saw Tennessee a year ago, a team that sort of blazed through early on, but it took them a while to get through and break through to that point. So I'm going to say the Georgia baseball team because I do still believe in what Wes Johnson is building.
It kind of does feel weird, though, in baseball, especially now, because you talk about the building, but so much of this roster turns over year to year. I feel like the transfer portal is huge in college baseball.
Yeah, more so even I think than college basketball at this point. It seems like it is happening so quickly. And I wonder too, with the House settlement possibly coming down the pipe here, how much of that is influencing this and how much, as Kirby Smart mentioned at SEC spring meetings, this is just what baseball is going to be, where you're not going to see a lot of teams take high school guys anymore and just cycle through the roster each and every year. And so I'll be interested in seeing, as this Georgia baseball program, a lot of it is built around Wes Johnson, but how many of these names that we got to know this year are going to continue to be a part of this program moving forward?
Okay, so the question off the top was, which non-football team would you like to see win the next national championship? I agree, baseball will be fun. I'm so jealous watching the Women's College World Series, the softball as well. Would love to see Georgia break through and get a national title right there, but there's only one right answer. And that right answer is the Georgia track team, especially the women's team, ranked number 1. Track and field national championships are coming up in a week's time, so we could see them win the next national championship. Ranked number 1, men ranked number 4, so there's a possibility for both sides, but would love to see the track and field team win that next national title.
Cody with the very Tom Brady-esque answer. My favorite championship is the next one.
The next one, which could be coming up very, very soon. All right, let's get it going. This is DawgNation at Large.
It's the show for the new breed of Georgia Bulldog fan. This is DawgNation at Large with DawgNation insiders Connor Riley and Kaylee Mansell.
We're going to have some fun on the show today. Connor and I chopping it up in the middle of the off season. We're going to get real specific, though, talking Georgia linebackers coming up later in the show. And Dog Bites, we'll have our meme machine, which will have our best college football tweets from throughout the week. We will share those with you. But off the top of the show today, kind of in the state of Georgia for the last month, we've had a couple of nice days, but the weather's just felt so gloomy. There have been gray clouds all over the place, and we've gotten so much rain. And Connor, when I think about college football and the state of college football right now, it feels like there's gray clouds hanging over the season. It seems like that fun and excitement is just not there right now.
No, this is a sport, and maybe it's just the times we live in. It feels like there's more negativity around it than ever before. I think maybe this is in part because of the uncertainty that comes with the college football playoff picture. Maybe it's because of how last season ended for Georgia, and really not just last season, but the entirety of it, because there was just so much negativity around the program, I think, throughout the course of the year with how they played early on, and that sort of seemed to fester over the course of the year. But it's a new team, but I don't get the sense that there's a whole lot of new excitement about both Georgia, the football team, entering 2025, but maybe as well the sport as a whole. And part of this could be uncertainty. Part of this could be just because of the transfer portal and the NIL and the way that that has wreaked havoc on this sport. I think that those things have not helped. I think the general fan, in terms of building popularity, in terms of building a connection to a program. And it's harder than ever to look in and lock in on this Georgia team and feel excited or look forward to this upcoming season. And I think so much of this isn't because of what Georgia is doing, but because of how the forces around college football have changed the way we look at and examine these teams.
Yeah, I feel like there's a few things going on. The one is this uncertainty of college football because they're, waiting on the House settlement, right? What is that going to mean? Is it actually going to change anything? So we've spent since April anticipating what could happen there. So we're talking about that a lot. We really want some kind of college football commissioner who can say how many transfer portals we're going to have, when they're going to be, and what that's going to do. And we can't find anybody like that. And I feel like all of the off-season talk around college football is around that, right? Like, what's the future playoff model and what is all this stuff going to look like? And I feel like when you're building a house, you think about like the plumbing and electrical. That's not the fun stuff to talk about. I want to talk about what finishes what entertainment system I'm going to put in there. But we're building infrastructure, and it's infrastructure that could change in 2 years. So it's also hard to get excited about that as well. But I feel like we're spending all offseason talking about the boring stuff.
Yeah, our colleague Brandon Adams in our DawgNation newsletter this week, I thought had a great point about how he's reached the point in summer where he now feels like he can buy the preview magazines, and it's something he always revels in and enjoys during the offseason. We lack consistency in the sport of college football right now. There are just few things I think that we can bank on and count on a year in, year out basis. Maybe that changes when the games roll around, and that's unfortunately maybe what college football is, where in the past you were able to talk about it all off season long, but now you're really just looking forward to the games in September through December and now stretching into deep pockets of January. But this is a sport where the off-field stuff, not even, the character concerns and things like that, but just the way that the sport is being handled by the higher-ups has made it just so boring and so unfun for people to talk about. I don't want to be arguing about automatic qualifiers versus a 5-11 college football playoff model. I want to argue about why people seem to think Arch Manning is so much better than Gunnar Stockton, despite the what we've seen on the field. And I think one day, if we can get back to that, where we have some stability in this sport and we can get back to what I think a lot of people love about this sport, it'll make the offseason a lot more bearable. But right now, there's just a lot of negativity and a lot of, I think, dissatisfaction among the college football fan base.
Yeah, even we hated Deion Sanders, but at least he brought fun, and we were talking about, they can't even win a bowl game. That's the kind of college football that you want to talk about and enjoy. So part of me got thinking, like, when did this start? When did this negativity, because it seems to be at an all-time high right now. And for me, I go back to, first off, like the SEC leaving CBS. I think that's part of it. Like we just were angry forever after that. And then the conference realignment that happened and the expansion of these conferences, when we started getting Pacific Coast teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference, even bringing in Texas and Oklahoma into the SEC, when Oregon and Southern Cal and UCLA are joining, playing Rutgers. I think that is kind of the moment that all of this started. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. And everybody agrees that everybody hates it, but we're all just feel like we're victim to it.
The hyper-specific moment for me where it seemed like all of this changed was when Texas and Oklahoma agreed to join the SEC. I think that moved this talk into finances. It moved this talk into money into hyperspeed, because around that same time, that's when NIL was allowed to become a thing, and you saw the transfer portal really pick up from there. Now, obviously, I think NIL and the transfer portal were always going to be intertwined in the way that they have been for the worst of the sport. But when you bring in Texas and you bring in Oklahoma in an effort to grease your television package, and thus the money that you are making off of that, you're only going to have to funnel that down to your players, because people out there in the media are going to point to that and say, well, hey, the players are the reason you're getting these billion-dollar contracts. Let's make sure they get some of that money. And the players feel entitled to that there. So Texas and Oklahoma, their decision to leave the Big 12 to join the SEC, where, let's be honest, nobody really wants them in the SEC. They're not SEC. They can try and interlope as them, But that's really where I think this went off the rails, where you saw a few years ago when Texas A&M and Missouri joined the league. Sure, a lot of people didn't love it. Nebraska leaving the Big 12 to join the Big 10. That round of realignment didn't feel great. But this Texas and Oklahoma, and then USC and UCLA joining the Big 12, the Big 10 the next year later, has warped this sport into a very gross funhouse mirror version of itself. And that's the moment I think you and I both agree, Cody, we can go back to and point to. This is when things started to change, and it's only continued to worsen things from there, as it was a move about money then and has unfortunately shown that this sport right now seems to be all about money rather than the traditions that I think a lot of people hold dear.
Yeah, people will ask you, well, then what are the good old days? And the good old days to me are that signing day of everybody gathering in Buttsmere and waiting for the faxes to come in, and the everybody felt together. Now, we'd be foolish to think that money was not involved on those signing days, but the fact that I don't know that I'm not upset that players get paid. Like, they should get paid for doing the work that they're doing. But the fact that it's so out front, but also kind of behind the scenes where we don't know exactly how much and it's just all speculation, it just seems the waters are muddied there, and we've reached a point where so many fans are like, just tell me when he's on the field for our team, actually in a game. Not even like in fall practice, not even on the roster. Tell me when he's playing in a game. That's when I'll get invested in a guy.
Right. And you can look at some of these guys now. I think Nitro Tuggle is a perfect example. Now, the reason he's not at Georgia is because of the off-field arrest that he had this March. But he was a guy that I think a lot of Georgia fans were excited to see. He played a small role as a freshman. He doesn't even get to his sophomore year at the University of Georgia. And signing day going away and that losing the impact that it had, I think is not a good sign for the sport, because signing day always represented the future. It was the guys that you could sell your program on, the guys that you were going to look forward to seeing and following them throughout the course of their career. Now, the names that we see on signing day, less than half of those guys we just know are not going to be at Georgia by the end of their third year. I believe 13 of the 26 signees from Georgia's 2023 recruiting class are no longer a part of this team. And if you're not able to follow and keep up with the guys that are supposed to be the future, it becomes a lot harder, especially in the offseason, to remain excited about your team. Because as you point out, Cody, when are these guys going to actually get on the field? Because even though they are wearing a Georgia uniform this fall, they might be wearing and playing for our chief rival next fall as well.
And it happens so much. And the stats, it's not like we're like no, the stats bear that out. I thank you for bringing the stats in. So here's my other question. How do we fix it? Right? Like, there's not like the genie is out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube, however you want to say it. It ain't going back in. So how do we fix this?
I do think that there are steps slowly being taken. I think you see all 16 SEC teams agree to what the College Sports Commission is passing in terms of having some legislation in terms of what players are going to be able to do, in terms of things being above board with NIL, in terms of the Deloitte clearinghouse and that aspect there. We need to settle on a college football playoff format. We can't keep changing it every 5-6 years. That change is not good for the sport. I think we need stability in knowing what to expect every single year. Going from 4 to 12 and now potentially 12 to 16 after just 2 years of 12 is not good for the sport. I think you need consistency in terms of a schedule. The SEC, for so long, we had those divisional formats where you knew what you were getting. Now you're talking about potentially an 8-9 game schedule. You were talking about rotating teams every year. Once I think fans know what to expect from a schedule standpoint, from a big picture issue standpoint, I think that's where you can agree and begin to focus a little more, to use your metaphor from earlier, Cody, on the TV that you're going to have in your living room, on the bed setup, on what you're planning on doing with the master bedroom, all those cosmetic changes, looking at the teams you're going to be playing, those sorts of things. That's where having these structural big issues that you have unsettled, I think, has to get fixed. Because if you're able to get those fixed, and you're not talking about college football playoff, which so obviously dominates the way this sport looks, the way the transfer portal works, whether it's a 1 window or a 2 window thing. If you're not talking about that, you're able to focus on, I think, the better aspects of this sport. Because if you've got a plumbing issue in your house, it doesn't matter how nice your TV is looking. That's all you're tending to think about. So I think fixing those big structural issues, agreeing to them and putting them to rest is the big step that needs to be taken instead of debating and kicking these issues down the line like they have done so often throughout this offseason.
I think we have beaten the house metaphor with like a dead horse to add something else into that. All right, so here's the thing. If we all agree that college football is in this, kind of gloomy place than it's ever been, we need to brighten our day up. We need a little ray of sunshine. So let's just kind of talk about some of the things we are excited about. What are the things that still bring us to this sport and make us love it? Connor, give me some stuff you're excited to see this year, and we can kind of bounce back and forth.
I'll go first here. The Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville. I know not everyone loves this. I know Kirby Smart has recently spoken about his desire to maybe see this become a home and home. I love that this game is played in Jacksonville. I love the uniqueness of it and what it means. I've gotten to the point where I enjoy making the trek down to Jacksonville every year. It feels comforting at that point. Like it is something with all this change. I know what I'm getting. Unfortunately, this is going to be the last year for the next couple as they undergo stadium renovations there. But also, this Georgia-Florida game this year, I think is going to be really interesting in a way it hasn't for a long time because Florida has just not been able to compete. With DJ Lagway under center for Florida, with Florida seeming to make the next steps there, I think this Georgia-Florida game can be really exciting this year, in addition to it being the last one in Jacksonville for a while. And if there is a Georgia-Florida game that has great stakes and both teams are good, something we haven't really seen since prior to the pandemic, I think that this could be a really fun and really exciting game. So this is something I've got circled on my calendar, that Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville at the beginning of November.
And this great thing that also all of a sudden has naming rights attached to it, right, for next year. And so that gives us even more reason to embrace this is the good old days, right, of playing in Jacksonville outside. Aren't they adding a roof to the Jacksonville Stadium? It's never going to feel just quite like the Gator Bowl again, so you'll get that last chance this year. That's a great one. And again, I feel like so many years those Florida fans have come in recently and like, man, we ain't going to win. This year they're going to come in thinking they've got something, especially after the way last year started. For me, I start thinking about the sun's going to start setting. I'll be on the field at Sanford Stadium, right? I'll be getting ready for pregame. The gates will have opened. The students all running down the stands to get to their spot for this Alabama game. Just that feeling of twilight right when you're inside Sanford Stadium, that's what gets me through. That when the anticipation is building, they're starting to pump the music, and you were in a big-time game atmosphere. That gets me excited thinking about this home schedule for Georgia. It'll all be added with fireworks and everything they've added over the last couple of years as well. But starting to think about those big game moments and those kind of tingles you get, even if you're not rooting for either team, you cannot deny the electricity in the air.
Absolutely. I think the first chance we're going to get at that this year is a Georgia-Alabama game. And you touched on it, Cody, because I've been in your shoes in terms of standing on the sidelines doing pregame work. There's something about a sunset at Sanford Stadium with a night game coming. Everyone looks forward to the night game because of the fact that it's at night. You get all day to tailgate. But when that sun's setting and you can feel the anticipation building, especially I think in those early season games where it is still a little bit light out as people trickle into the stadium, there's something unique about that there in that regard. I think that's one big home game. I think another home game later in the season when Texas comes to Athens, first time in program history they will be doing that. Arch Manning in particular, because I don't think it's a surprise to viewers of the show, viewers of DawgNation, that I am quite skeptical of Arch Manning in terms of what he might be able to do. And I can't help but think of his uncle, Peyton Manning, when he was first making his way in the NFL and he was praised as this next great thing. And Peyton had actually backed it up those first couple years, but he would go into New England and play a defensive oriented team against a quarterback who at that point in time, was not the greatest of all time, but was just a guy who went out there, did the things to win, wanted to win, ultra competitive. And that is as far as I'm willing to go comparing Gunnar Stockton and Tom Brady. And if Georgia's defense flummoxes and flusters Arch Manning in that November 15th game and Georgia's able to get a win in a way that their schedule has been set up where Texas has a bye before coming into Georgia. So that is, in my mind, Greg Sankey trying to grease the wheels and make things primo for Texas to come in and beat Georgia and Sanford. But if Georgia wins that game at home and makes things miserable for Arch Manning, boy, oh boy, am I going to have a lot to say in the DawgNation at large the week after. So Arch Manning's first trip to Athens is something I'm very excited for in this upcoming season. Because if it goes away, I think it might he's going to have a long night, just like his uncle used to up there in Foxborough.
I kind of had that same thing written down. The thing, just getting to the games, getting, again, past all the lumber and the PVC pipe or the PEX or however you're building your house nowadays, right? If we're going to go back to it. But when we're just going to get pregame and it's going to be the split screen, here's Gunnar Stockton's stats. Here's first-year starter Arch Manning stats. And we're going to be able to see it. And we're going to be able to talk about it. And we're going to say, this guy's better than that guy. That is the college football we want, right? Here's what this guy's doing better. Even to the point, Austin Simmons. I'm excited to see what he's going to do at Ole Miss, right? Against what first-year starter Gunnar Stockton does. And I think that part of me, just getting to the games and talking about that. One of the other things that I love so much, and it kind of goes back to the atmosphere around the game, but just that feeling when you hop on 316 and there's those folks with the flags flapping on their doors, this just knowing it's game day and knowing that all these Georgia people are coming together. It was something in the offseason that I did not feel until I went on the DawgNation cruise, and you're all of a sudden kind of not on a game day, but in a room full of dog people and just people you feel comfortable with. I'm excited about getting that feeling again, because it is something that brings everybody together. Nobody worries about anything else, how much money somebody's making, who they're voting for, none of that. We're all dog people on a Saturday, and that feeling of everybody coming together is something that draws me back to this game, no matter how ridiculous the money is or what the conferences look like. Just that group of people really gets me excited.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's me getting older or what it may be, but just appreciating the Saturday. And maybe, in some ways, as bad as the sport has become from a national landscape standpoint in terms of figuring things out, in terms of people arguing, in terms of the national media and the way they have evolved to cover this sport, you appreciate the game days so much more now because they do feel more finite, and they do feel, even though the matchups might not be what they used to be, and the way that we discuss the season has changed, those still 12 Saturdays where there's a Georgia football game where you're guaranteed to have those. And, Georgia's been very fortunate, and they've gotten 14, 15, 16 in recent years. Those feel all the more special. And I do think that when that first one comes against Marshall, there's going to be that excitement of, we don't got to worry about anything else. We get to sit here, we get to watch, and we get to discuss Georgia football and really soak it in this year and soak it in a way. So maybe, in a way, because this has all been so negative, that first Saturday or I guess it's the last Saturday in August, but the first Saturday of the college football season, I think that's something that this year in particular is going to be appreciated even more because of what we've all gone through collectively this offseason.
Yeah, I don't need it to be Oregon or Clemson. It can be Marshall. Let's just get to a game day as well. I think one thing else I'm excited about is like last year when we got to see Chaz Chambliss have his breakout year, finishes with 6.5 sacks. He's a guy who's just been kind of there for a few years, but finally kind of had his moment. I love seeing stuff like that, and it gets me to start thinking, who on this Georgia team, who is this guy that's been hanging around who's finally going to have his moment, finally have his breakout year? So who can that be on this year's team? Just the thought of that gets me excited.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar with Dan Jackson. Who are the stories on this year's team? The guys who I think, as you touch on, Cody, and they're going to become more rare in college football, the guys that hang around your program for 3-4 years waiting to make that impact. And Chaz was playing a lot early in his career, but he was not that necessarily productive player. Who are those guys that have those breakthrough moments? And you think, Chaz and Dan together, them forcing and recovering that fumble in the Georgia Tech game, a play that will always live on, and I think in the minds of Georgia fans and what that game means. Who are those guys? Is that a Gabe Harris on the defensive line, a Kristen Miller who finally emerge after seemingly biding their time there? We know those players are going to emerge. Yes, you bring in more transfers in this day and age, 10 for Georgia this year, but there are still a number of guys that have been biding their time, waiting to make their move, waiting to make their moment. And whoever those guys are, I don't think we were talking a whole lot this time a year ago about what Dan Jackson could do, about what Chaz Chambliss could do. But those are two of the more important players and leaders on this Georgia team. And you can bet that they're going to have guys emerge in a similar fashion this fall.
And something about, one other advantage I have from being on the field is I kind of get to look up in that corner of the end zone where all the parents sit. And it is something for me because we've grown now so callous to so many of these players because we know they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars and they transferred and da-da-da. These are still like young men. and they still have mom and dad sitting in the stands looking at them. I get such a thrill out of looking up there and seeing parents, especially because like Jeff has talked to a lot of these people. We recognize so many of the parents now. Like last year, it would be Malachi Stark's parents looking down, or Tate Ratlich's dad, Dean, watching on, or Lawson Lucky's mom watching, and watching those folks go crazy. And even if you don't know who they are, they're wearing their son's jersey, and they're the only guy wearing a 63 in the whole building, right? Because who wears that? So that to me personalizes it in a way that, because we don't get to talk to players a ton during the year, it's not as personal anymore. We don't get to hear from so many of these guys. It makes it more personal, which is what sport's about for me. Again, the story and making it real.
Yeah, I can think of all these guys that, and I've sort of aged out of this a little bit as my role here at DawgNation has changed. But so many of these guys, I used to cover their high school recruitments and cover their announcements. So, like, I remember when Oscar Delp committed to Georgia. I was at his ceremony that year. And now he's a senior and expected to be a key leader on this team. And you just sort of see the way that those guys develop over the course of their careers and who they become from when you first meet them as 16, 17-year-old high school kids to now on the precipice of becoming an adult, and how they have changed throughout the year. There is something comforting, I think, as you point out, Cody, in seeing those parents. And like you and I, we're at the stadium at weird hours where they're super early. We're often there super late, and that's when the parents are there as well, because they often get there early to see the guys get off the bus, and then are usually there to greet them coming out of the locker room afterwards. And so it's always really cool, as you point out, Cody, to see those guys develop over their career. And I think back to some of the high school recruitments that I was covering still at the time, and seeing how those guys have now aged up and aged out of the program, it is always special.
All right, so there are bright spots coming for us in this college football gloom and doom that's been building up all offseason. We are almost there, Connor, and we will be there very, very soon, talking about Georgia and Marshall, and we'll play the games on the field, and we'll compare stats, and we'll talk actual football and not what might be and how much money and all these things. So we'll have actually a real big breakdown of Georgia's linebackers coming up in just a moment. But before we do that, we want to say thank you to Zagoria Law Firm for being a part of DawgNation at Large every week. The thing we love most about Zagoria Law Firm is they're a partner of DawgNation, and they're the only law firm in the state that specializes in representing people bitten by dogs. It's a very specific and kind of niche thing, but if it happens to you, you want the right kind of representation, and that's what you can do. The official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs, they literally wrote the book on how to win these cases. And we're not just talking dog bite. If a dog knocks somebody down that you love and causes pain or is suffering right there, Zagoria Law are the folks to turn to. So give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. Check them out at their website, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE or ZagoriaLaw.com. Thanks to Zagoria Law for being a part of DawgNation at Large. And let's do some dog bites. All right, so throughout this offseason, Kaylee and Connor have been breaking down position by position this 2025 Georgia Bulldogs team. Today, we are going to hit the linebackers. It could be inside linebackers or outside linebackers. The other fun part of this is we've been adding all of these emojis to represent the players, and we let Connor kind of decode what they are. I know who they are because I built them. So, Connor, as we start at the top, who is the first linebacker we're going to talk about today?
Okay, so that is an eye emoji, a hook emoji, and then a bronze medal
that has a number on it.
That has a number 3. Is it CJ Allen? And I'm going with CJ, if only because of the number 3.
C, you got the
C.
eyes. J, the hook is just a J. And then, CJ number 3. So CJ Allen, our first one, and why not? He's returning back as your middle linebacker, now third year as a starter. Leading tackler, depending on who you talk to, it was interesting. PFF, Pro Football Focus, has him as Georgia's leading tackler a year ago. Georgia has Malachi Starks as the leading tackler, but kind of irrelevant. He had 52 tackles last year. What do we expect out of it now, year 3 of C.J. Allen as your starter?
I'm fascinated to see by what we see out of C.J. Allen this year. We saw him take some real strides over the course of his sophomore season, and when Georgia's had an award-winning butt-kiss inside linebacker, Jalen Walker, Nakobe Dean, Roquan Smith, all doing it over the past 8 seasons. They've all been in their third year in the program. And I'm not saying CJ Allen is going to check that box. I don't quite know if he's got the natural talent that those three previously did. But I wouldn't bet against it either because of what we've seen with Glenn Schumann and knowing how much they have always valued CJ Allen, and even more so than what he brings to the field from a physical ability standpoint. I think that this guy is quietly under-discussed as a leader on this Georgia team and what he brings in that regard. And I think that because he has not won a championship yet, and because he's looking to get his own sort of out there, I think that this defense is going to be a lot hungrier this year because of the presence of CJ Allen and what he means for this team.
Did he meet expectations a year ago for you?
I think so. I think maybe some might have wanted him to see him maybe make another leap, but with how they were using Jalen Walker and moving him around, I think they asked CJ to play a little bit differently. I will say, I think this year, if you're looking for something from him, he needs to make more of those disruptive plays, those sacks, tackles for loss, interceptions. He obviously had one, and an incredible one in that Florida game, and I think that's an example of him showing what he can do when he has those opportunities, and I think he's going to have that this year.
All right, so let's move on to our next one. Can you figure this one out for me? A linebacker.
Okay, so that is Santa Claus, and that is a rock. But Santa Claus is also known as Chris Kringle.
Yeah,
and that rock could be Cole, so that is Chris Cole.
Ah, very good, Connor. Chris Cole, he was the freshman phenom. He looks like he's, chiseled out of stone. He looks the part. Last year, looking at it, only played 107 snaps on defense. Pretty good as a freshman. Had 12 total tackles. And he's the guy everybody's talking about this year.
This is a queen of the chessboard type player in that I think he can do just about everything on the field. Now, last year he got on the field in part because Small-Munden picked up a midseason injury, and he was really impressive with how he played in coverage. But entering 2025, with Georgia having to replace a lot of production as a pass rushing team, I'm interested to see how they use him in that regard. I know, look, I'm not going to compare him to Jalen Walker. That'd be unfair, especially as the former president of the Jalen Walker fan club. But I'm interested in seeing how he's used as a weapon and how he is used this year. Obviously, you want to see him make strides as an every down inside linebacker. That's something you saw Jalen Walker do a season ago. But how is he able to be a disruptive player? Because I think he's going to play a ton on third down, and we know third down is hugely important for this Georgia defense. And he's got the talent and ability and the body type to do just about everything. I'm fascinated to see how Georgia goes out there and tries to get the most out of Chris Cole, because he does seem like a guy that can do everything, but you don't want to put too much on his plate, because it's worth remembering, as you point out, Cody, only played about 100 snaps last year. And we expect big leaps from guys in their sophomore season, but at that linebacker position, it's usually been year 3 when we've seen that, not necessarily in year 2.
Yeah, it does remind me a lot of CJ Allen from year 1 to year 2. We were like, all right, he's played on the field, he knows his thing, and it wasn't quite what we had built up. All right, so the next one, can you decode the next one?
All right, so you've got, again, the Chris Cole matchup there, and then I think, is that a buddy, a friend?
Best
and
friend.
Knowing what I know, Chris Cole's best friend on this team is Justin Williams, who, all right, good answer there.
There it is.
Great job. Cody, you're getting better and better at these, because I'm really having to stretch to try and guess who these might be. Justin Williams, I thought, looked the best defender on G-Day in terms of what he was able to do and how he was able to play. I think he's a more natural linebacker, off-ball linebacker, than Chris Cole is. And so I'm fascinated to see what he's able to do. You talk about leadership intangibles. This guy has them in spades. They really like what he can become. And I'm interested to just see what role he's able to carve out for himself this year. I don't think he's going to have more tackles than Chris Cole, than CJ Allen, than Raylan Wilson. But this is a guy who is as talented as anyone. If his motor is able to match his talent, this is going to be a guy Georgia's going to have to find ways to try and keep off the field, because he's going to make things very, very difficult for this coaching staff in an absolutely loaded Georgia linebacker room.
Yeah, you talk about the inside linebackers. I am interested to see how they use Justin Williams, a former 5-star. It reminds me a lot, too, like the fact that he did not play a ton, 24 snaps is what I had. Played a lot of special teams for Georgia last year. It reminds me a lot of Ellis Robinson. Like, the expectations are through the roof, and like, why can't we get this guy on the field more? And obviously there's more of a logjam at linebacker than we're seeing at cornerback. But it seems like somebody who, no matter what he does, is probably not going to live up to fan expectations, because there are such high expectations for a guy like Justin Williams.
Yeah, and I think, the Ellis Robinson and the Justin Williams situations are a little different because of just the issues, as you point out, Cody, that we saw at cornerback last season. But I will say, coming out of spring, I feel a lot better about what Justin Williams is going to be able to bring to this team and what his role might ultimately look like. Even if he's not one of the top 2 or 3 players in tackles on this team, I feel comfortable saying he's going to make plays every Saturday that you notice and you see, not just in the box score, but when you sit there and watch the game, seeing him take on blocks, make plays in the back end there. I think that this is a guy who has as high a ceiling as anyone in that inside linebacker room, knowing what I have said about CJ Allen and Chris Cole.
Yeah, he can keep the team hyped too, which is not an overrated quality by any stretch of the imagination, in my opinion. You've got to have those kind of guys in your locker room, and he seems a guy that's always a ball of energy. All right, let's move on to the next one. This one could be tricky for you.
Okay, so that is a flag, an American flag, and that is a truck. Maybe
moving
like
van.
Yep. A moving van. Okay, well, so the United States flag, you think Army. The moving van, you think transfer.
There you
portal.
go.
This is Elo Madozi.
Hello, it's me.
That's incredible. Elo Madozi coming in from Army. Huge expectations. Had 6.5 sacks last season. You've seen, I think, the leaps that he made in year 1 to year 2 as he made a transition from a wide receiver to a defensive side of the ball. Now, with the coaching he's going to get at Georgia, with the attention to detail that he's going to have there, you think coming from Army, he's used to the discipline that they're going to have at the University of Georgia. And there's going to be a lot riding on him this year because they are so inexperienced at that outside linebacker position. I think, look, there's going to be a lot of talk about can he hit that sack total of 6.5 that he did a season ago. But what I think, and I'm most excited about Madozi, with bringing him in, that frees Georgia to move Gabe Harris around and use him as his most productive role. In the past, we've seen that on our defensive line. But during spring practice, with what they had there, I thought that might maybe pigeonhole them with how they're going to be able to use Gabe Harris this year. But when you bring in Madozi, another guy who has played real football before, played in big games, played against Notre Dame last year when he was at Army, but also still has his best football in front of him, I think that this is a guy who we've seen Georgia have a lot of success with in the transfer portal. Guys who have done things at other schools and are able to build to that. Most famously on the defensive side of the ball, a guy like Tyke Smith. Now, I don't think it's going to take Elo as long to get up to speed at Georgia as it did with Tyke, but you saw at the end of his career here at the University of Georgia, Tyke was as impactful as any player on the Georgia defense. And while they play a different position, I'm really interested to see how Georgia goes out there and uses Madozi, the transfer from Army.
Yeah, really interesting to see Cole Kublik, a guy who knows his line of scrimmage play, saying he's got huge expectations for Elo Madozi if he can put on a little bit of weight. So that's something we'll definitely track from his time getting into Athens. Obviously missed spring practice, but he's there all summer. Can he put on some weight to really play in the SEC and make a difference in his first year? All right, let's finish this one up. If you get this one, and I don't have to explain it, I'm impressed.
Okay, so that is a baby.
Yep.
And that is usually the demon emoji. And
It
so
is
I believe
a demon.
this is Isaiah Gibson.
A baby demon.
A baby demon. He played obviously for the Northside Demon or
Warner Robins.
Warner Robins Demons, excuse me. I know Northside is a big school down there. I do not want to get that mixed up.
Yeah, they're right.
Isaiah Gibson, 5-star freshman, a guy that looks like a 5-star should. Seeing him on the practice field, like he is one of the most physically impressive freshmen that I have seen walk on here at the University of Georgia in terms of the practice field. Obviously, he's on scholarship. He could have gone anywhere. We talked about that outside linebacker room, and we've seen in the past that you can play freshmen at that position. Nolan Smith found a role. You've seen guys come in year one and make an impact there. I don't expect Isaiah Gibson to be a starter. I don't expect him to play significant snaps. But I'll be interested in seeing what kind of role he is able to carve out for himself and what he's able to do, because there is an opportunity there for playing time with him. And he's not the only freshman in that room. You've got Chase Linton as well. You've got Darren Akinabon to go alongside him. But Gibson has as high a ceiling, I think, as anyone Georgia brought in this previous recruiting cycle. And he's a guy who's very, very impressive on the hoof. And so I'm interested in seeing how he makes the adjustment to the SEC level and what he's going to be able to bring this team this season.
And it could be another one of those things where the way this schedule sets up with Marshall and Austin Peay, he's got 2 weeks to get some game experience before he has to play in the SEC.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this probably more as the season goes on. Last year, Georgia only had 3 games where they won by 20 points or more compared to, I believe, 8 the season before. And that just doesn't allow you to get the reps that young players need. And so for those first 2 games, as much as we're going to talk about Gunnar Stockton and how this team looks, those games for those younger players, because it's a young Georgia team, are going to be so vital, especially as the season progresses.
Yeah, they'll have some real game film that they can break down and get better from as the weeks progress there, because you're going to have to be better with the way the schedule finishes, so that'll be good to kind of ease them into that. So that's going to do it for Dog Bites this week. Want to urge you, if you are watching now, to watch again coming up tomorrow morning. DawgNation Daily every morning, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Jeff Sintel going to be on there talking about some more big-time recruits that Georgia's bringing in. Of course, Justice Fitzpatrick, Minka Fitzpatrick's little brother, was one of the additions for this team this week, so we'll talk about that. You'll get to hear that from Jeff as well. And if you're watching on YouTube tonight, or if you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, wherever you're watching, head on over to our YouTube channel and subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything to do it. What it does is it helps us know who's watching and that you appreciate it, but it also will give you updates when we are going live. Hey, DawgNation at Large is coming on 7 o'clock. We're going, and that way won't miss anything, and you can watch us each and every day. So hit that subscribe button if you are watching on YouTube today. All right, now for another staple we do every week here on DawgNation at Large. It is time for the Meme Machine.
Who's that going down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's the Meme Machine and Red Flag. It's the Meme Machine and Red Flag. No, no!
All right, it gives us a chance to share our favorite things from the internet, especially related to college football or college sports in general throughout the week. Connor, I'll let you go first this week. What you got?
Yeah, so Chipper Jones made some big comments on social media this weekend. I know Brandon Adams talked about him earlier in the week. And he identified a couple of the teams he was actually talking about and the ones that he did not like, Georgia among them. I will note things got very chippy between Georgia and Oklahoma State. That is one of the big differences I think you've seen with baseball in recent years, specifically at the college level. There's a back and forth there that maybe doesn't always transpire to the Major League Baseball level. Obviously, with what happened at Florida, with the Florida coach Kevin Sullivan, drew a lot of criticism this week and a bunch of stuff out there. Wake Forest and Tennessee also getting into some things. But this long rant from Chipper Jones felt very old man yells at cloud to me. But at the same point in time, like, I can't tell Chipper Jones that he was wrong. Right. And so it got me thinking, Cody, what are some, moments or things out there that you feel are very like old man yells at the cloud about, but you also know that you're right about?
Even last year, the jersey thing for me, it almost became a joke, right? Where it's like, how many buttons can they keep going down? And that did make me feel very old for that. I'm trying to think of other things that make me feel old. There are a few things that I get annoyed about from young people. But yeah, I think Chipper loves to jump on and add to the conversation, and why not? Like, you're a retired Hall of Fame baseball player. He can, especially commenting on baseball, I feel great about that.
Yeah, I know for me, one thing that I see, guys wearing like single digit uniforms, like why, like I love wide receivers when they wear the old 80 uniforms. Like we've got too many guys that aren't good enough wearing those single digit uniforms. Those numbers need to be reserved for the best players on the team. You
don't like to see, you want a big guy wearing number one? Is it you don't like that yourself?
I don't want that. Big guys need to be wearing big numbers.
Yeah, and too much self-importance on Instagram or selfies or all that kind of stuff also rubs me the wrong way. But I'm just kind of people. We're two offensive linemen, Connor. We kind of have that. And speaking of retired professional players, let's get to the best thing I saw on the internet this week, and it was from former Dog David Andrews, who officially retired from the Patriots.
Coach Rick and all my coaches at Georgia, being a Bulldog was the only thing I ever thought I wanted to be. My time at Georgia will always be special to me. It's where I grew into a young man, and the development I got on the field helped me more than I could imagine transitioning to here in New England.
Now, I am a little surprised, Connor. This is the New England Patriots center who played at Georgia, and you didn't bring this one up?
I had a feeling that somebody else was going to bring it up. David Andrews retiring this week made me feel old because I remember covering him in college. My first year sort of covering Georgia was his senior year at the University of Georgia. And look, I'm an unabashed New England Patriots fan. It's been so cool to watch his career unfold, seeing him win 2 Super Bowls as the team's starting center, going from an overlooked prospect out of high school, out of Wesleyan here in the metro Atlanta area, being undrafted and making himself into a real success story. Just tip of the cap to David Andrews and everything he meant. You saw, I think, a lot of outpouring from people in the New England community about how much he meant to that franchise. I think those that followed him at Georgia and knew him from his time here in Athens can speak to that as well. And that's why David Andrews this week, a center that played here over a decade ago, wasn't exactly the most accomplished player, only made second team All SEC, but meant a ton to the fabric of Georgia football, just as he did at New England. So to David Andrews, a great career. And even to you, Cody, thank you for allowing the space for us to talk about this on the show this week.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we talked about, the walk-ons earlier, that makes us excited for football. When you get the undrafted guy who's walking out with 2 Super Bowl rings as he was the front man for Tom Brady, that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, it's what sports I think are all about. And he touched on this there. Played for Georgia only in college. Obviously, that's pre-transfer portal era. Played for his entire career with one team. I think that's something that I think sports fans in general really cherish and appreciate. And I hope that as we sort of navigate this transfer portal and get more accustomed to it, people begin to appreciate and respect the guys that spend one time in one place a little bit more. Because it does mean a lot to the fans, as I think David Andrews understands.
All right, so how are we going to stay happy this week, Connor? As we wrap up the show here, what's going to keep us happy throughout this week?
I'm not going to think at all about the House settlement this weekend. We are now entering week 3 of Judge Claudia Wilken having this on her desk. No indication that she's any closer to signing this settlement and giving it off. She's clearly not thinking about it in terms of the importance with college football and what that means. So I'm going to join her in that and not think about it at all this weekend.
Our poor friend Mike Griffith, man, he's been ready to write this story and talk about all these rules. And he's been sitting on go since the beginning of April. We're now in the beginning of June, and there's not really an end in sight.
No, we don't know when it's going to happen. And I think, tying everything that we've talked about in the show back together, the uncertainty with the sport, like we just need set parameters. We just need rules locked in and ready to go. And I think from there, maybe the sport will start to look like the sport of old.
All right, we're going to wrap up DawgNation at large. Maybe we will get a Kaylee Mansell sighting coming up next week on the show. Excited to have her back, and I appreciate her letting me sit in her seat for this week. That's going to do it. We'll see you right back here next Thursday night on DawgNation at large.